What if Sparta had destroyed Athens completely? If Sparta had not merely defeated Athens, but wiped it from the face of the earth, burned the Parthenon to ash, slaughtered or enslaved its citizens, salted its soil so that nothing would ever grow again, would the world we know today even exist in anything close to its current form? Or would the foundations of our culture, our politics, and our philosophy have been carved into something unrecognizable? To imagine this alternate past, we must step back into the final months of the Peloponnesian War in the year 404 BCE, when after 27 years of unrelenting conflict, famine, and shifting alliances, Athens was finally brought to its knees. The long walls that had connected the city to its vital port at Piraeus were crumbling under siege, its once mighty fleet reduced to splinters and burnt hulls, its silver reserves exhausted, its empire shattered. In reality, Sparta, under the command of the victorious Admiral Lysander, imposed harsh but survivable terms, forcing Athens to tear down its walls, surrender its remaining ships, and accept an oligarchic government under Spartan supervision. The city, humiliated and diminished, nevertheless remained alive, and within a generation it would begin to recover, to produce philosophers, playwrights, and political thinkers who would shape the memory of Greece for centuries. But in this alternate history, mercy never arrives. There is no debate in the Spartan assembly that ends in moderation. Instead, there is only a wave of rage and vengeance, driven not only by Sparta's pride, but by the unyielding demands of its allies. Corinth, resentful of decades of Athenian interference in trade, calls for blood. Thebes, still nursing the sting of past defeats and wary of future Athenian resurgence, argues that only total destruction will ensure lasting security. This time, Persia, instead of quietly intervening to preserve Athens as a counterweight to Sparta, decides that a weakened and isolated Sparta would be easier to manipulate after the war, and so it offers no objection. The vote passes. What follows is an annihilation unparalleled in the memory of the Greek world. The Spartan army marches first into Piraeus, the bustling harbor that for centuries had been Athens' lifeline to grain from the Black Sea and trade from across the Mediterranean. Warehouses are looted, ships burned where they lie at anchor, and the very docks pulled apart by hand, so that the port becomes useless rubble. From there, the army pushes into the city proper, climbing the slopes toward the Acropolis under a sky thick with smoke. Resistance is brief, desperate, and doomed. Hoplites cut down anyone who resists. Those who surrender are bound in chains. The marble temples that once gleamed in the Attic sun are defiled, statues toppled, and the colossal bronze Athena Promachos, symbol of the city's defiance, is dragged down and melted into weapons. In this single week of violence, centuries of art, drama, and knowledge are lost. Scrolls from the great playwrights tossed into the flames, the works of historians and philosophers reduced to drifting ash. The destruction is not limited to the city's stones. Its people are scattered to the wind. Some are sold in the markets of the Peloponnese, others shipped to distant colonies where they will live and die in servitude, their language and identity erased. The name Athens becomes a cautionary whisper among other poleis, a reminder that even the proudest city can vanish if it stands too long in the way of Spartan steel. And as the last columns of smoke curl into the sky, visible from the islands across the Gulf, a chilling new reality settles over the Hellenic world. The rules of Greek warfare have changed forever. In the past, city-states might defeat one another, impose tribute, even dismantle fortifications, but annihilation, the complete erasure of a fellow Greek polis, had been unthinkable. Now, that taboo lies in ruins alongside the shattered columns of the Parthenon. The question is no longer who will lead Greece, but whether the Greece that emerges from this moment will bear any resemblance to the one that existed before. For with Athens gone, its fleet sunk, its thinkers silenced, and its democracy extinguished, the heart of Greek culture has been ripped out, leaving a void that no one yet knows how to fill. And into that void, powers both near and far will soon rush, reshaping the destiny of the ancient world in ways no Athenian, Spartan, or Persian could yet foresee. The days and weeks following the annihilation of Athens see the Greek world thrown into a state of shock and disarray, for the vacuum left by the city's erasure is not merely political, but cultural, economic, and psychological. And every polis, from the smallest island harbor to the inland strongholds of the mainland, feels the tremors. The Delian League, that vast maritime coalition Athens had once dominated, collapses instantly without its leader. The tribute ships that once brought silver and grain to the Piraeus never set sail, and the smaller allied cities, freed from Athenian oversight, quickly find themselves exposed to a harsher reality. Many of these cities, fearing that they might be the next to face Spartan wrath, scramble to pledge allegiance to Sparta, offering their loyalty in exchange for protection. Others drift toward the Persian sphere, reasoning that the distant great king might be a safer master than the spear of a nearby Spartan hoplite. The Aegean, once a busy and relatively balanced network of naval powers, now becomes a chessboard dominated by two looming forces: Sparta on the mainland and Persia across the eastern waters, each moving to secure the fragments of what Athens once held. Yet Sparta's ascendance is not without its flaws, for while it is unmatched on land and feared for its discipline, it is a city built for war, not for governance. The Spartan system is rigid, inward-looking, and dependent on the subjugation of the helots, the vast underclass of enslaved Messenians who work the fields to sustain the warrior elite. Now, in taking over the ports, islands, and distant colonies once tied to Athens, the Spartans must send harmosts, military governors, far from home, stretching their limited manpower and exposing weaknesses in their control. Their rule is blunt and uncompromising. Tribute is demanded without regard for local hardship, dissent is crushed swiftly, and little effort is made to understand or respect the unique cultures of the cities they dominate. Trade begins to suffer as Athenian merchants are gone, their ships burned, or their crews sold. The intricate web of commerce that had flowed through the Piraeus and out across the Mediterranean frays, leaving shortages and inflation in its wake, culturally. The loss is even sharper. Without Athens to sponsor festivals, fund theaters, or compete in the arts, Greek culture tilts towards Spartan austerity. Processions become smaller, more militaristic, and focused on celebrating military victories rather than the gods or the human spirit. The great tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides vanish into the shadows of memory, many of their works already lost in the fires, their surviving actors and playwrights scattered or silenced. Philosophy fares no better. Socrates, if not killed outright in the sack, is enslaved, his probing questions now heard only by fellow captives. Without him, there is no Plato, no Academy, no Aristotle to lay the groundwork for centuries of inquiry. The entire lineage of Western thought is crippled at birth, its potential scattered like ash in the wind. Democracy itself is extinguished with Athens, remembered only as the failed experiment of an arrogant city whose ideals could not save it from destruction. Across Greece, oligarchies, often backed by Spartan garrisons, take root, their leaders ruling through fear and the knowledge that resistance could lead to the same fate that befell Athens. The other poleis, once emboldened to debate their own futures, grow cautious, suppressing political agitation before it can be noticed, and the agora, once a place where citizens argued, dreamed, and shaped the destiny of their city, becomes merely a marketplace, watched over by silent armored sentinels. But while Sparta's grip appears firm, the seeds of its own undoing are already being sown. Corinth, whose merchants once thrived on trade with Athens, now finds Spartan policies strangling their profits. Thebes, though delighted to see a rival destroyed, begins to see in Sparta's growing empire a threat to its own ambitions. Persia, ever patient, watches from the east, smiling at a Greece divided and preparing to press its advantage when the moment comes. The Greek world has entered a new era, one defined by fear, uniformity, and a stifling of the intellectual flame that had once burned so brightly in Athens. But as history has always shown, even in the ancient world, an empire built on fear is never as stable as it seems. And the question is not whether resistance will rise, but when, and from where, the first sparks will fly. In the years that follow the obliteration of Athens, the vacuum in art, thought, and innovation becomes impossible to ignore. For while Sparta's hoplites can command obedience with the point of a spear, they cannot conjure the restless energy of the Athenian mind that once drew talent from across the Aegean. And without that magnetic center, the Greek world begins to drift intellectually. Cities like Syracuse in distant Sicily attempt to fill the void, their tyrants sponsoring poets, architects, and mathematicians in an effort to inherit the mantle of cultural leadership, while the Ionian cities along the coast of Asia Minor, Ephesus, Miletus, and others, quietly work to preserve what scraps of Athenian learning they can smuggle away from the fires, hiding scrolls in temple vaults or shipping them across the sea to be copied in secret. Yet the spark that drove the flourishing of ideas in Athens was not merely in its texts, but in its environment. A dense urban fabric of debate, theater, political experimentation, and public discourse, all feeding on one another, all made possible by a citizenry accustomed to questioning, competing, and imagining new forms of life. That ecosystem is gone, and with it, the cross-pollination of ideas that had propelled advances in philosophy, drama, architecture, and even warfare. The very notion that citizens might govern themselves collectively becomes a fading memory, replaced by the practical reality of oligarchies and Spartan-appointed councils whose first loyalty is to the ruling elite. Without the Athenian example, the democratic impulse that might have inspired other cities to experiment with broader political participation is smothered. Young men who, in another history, might have stood in the assembly to argue policy now serve silently in hoplite ranks, drilled to obey rather than to question, even in places untouched by Spartan garrisons. Fear shapes behavior. Poets avoid political satire. Historians avoid criticizing those in power. Philosophers retreat from public life to avoid charges of subversion. The ripple effects extend beyond politics and art into the very strategic balance of the Mediterranean, for without Athens as a maritime counterweight, Sparta's control of the Aegean becomes nearly absolute, allowing them to dictate trade routes, extract heavier tribute, and deny naval support to any city that defies them. This power, however, is brittle, for it rests on an institutionally land-focused society, forced to play the part of a naval hegemon, and the strain shows in stretched supply lines, unreliable allies, and a growing resentment among those who see their prosperity sacrificed to feed Sparta's dominance. Persia, always watching, senses opportunity. Its satraps in Asia Minor quietly extend their influence, offering favorable trade terms and protection to cities disenchanted with Spartan rule, binding them with gold and promises rather than with chains and spears. Over time, cultural influence begins to flow eastward rather than westward, with Ionian cities adopting more Persian customs and aligning their economies to suit the great king's needs. The Hellenic identity itself starts to fracture, no longer anchored by a vibrant Athens, but pulled between the rigid discipline of Sparta and the opulent, expansive world of Persia. In this altered reality, the trajectory of Greek civilization is bent away from the path we know. The future will not be defined by a synthesis of Athenian creativity and Spartan discipline, but by a narrowing of thought, a suppression of civic freedom, and an increasing dependency on foreign powers to mediate internal Greek affairs. Yet beneath this controlled surface, history's pressure builds, for human ambition and rivalry cannot be extinguished entirely, and the very allies that helped Sparta destroy Athens now begin to measure the cost of their bargain. wondering if the flames that consumed the city by the Ilissos might one day be turned on them, and if so, whether it is better to wait for that moment or to act before the Spartan spear turns in their direction. By the fourth year after Athens's destruction, the first real signs of strain within the Spartan Empire begin to surface, not as sudden revolts, but as subtle fractures. Trade disputes between Corinthian merchants and Spartan governors, quiet refusals by island ports to send full tribute, whispers in Theban assemblies that the balance of power has tipped too far toward Laconia. And though Sparta's Harmos report these as minor issues, the underlying discontent is spreading like cracks beneath the surface of a marble column, invisible until the moment of collapse. The absence of Athens has eliminated a rival, but also a stabilizing force. For in the old world, city-states could play the powers against each other, seeking concessions or protection. Now, there is only the choice of submission to Sparta or seeking aid from Persia, and both options carry their own dangers. Economically, Sparta struggles to maintain the vast network it has inherited. Ships must be built, garrisons paid, tribute collected, and transported across dangerous seas. And while the spoils of Athens initially seemed to promise wealth, the reality is that managing an empire drains resources faster than conquest fills them. The Helot population at home grows restless as more Spartan warriors are sent abroad, leaving fewer overseers to enforce their subjugation. And the fear of a massive uprising stalks the minds of the ephors in every council session. Diplomatically, Sparta's blunt approach erodes goodwill. Corinth, once a vocal advocate for Athens' destruction, now finds its trading fleet subject to Spartan control and its profits diminished by the disruption of established routes, while Thebes, remembering its own past under Spartan dominance, begins to quietly rebuild its military strength under the guise of defending against Persian influence. Meanwhile, across the eastern Aegean, Persian satraps extend loans to struggling cities, provide grain in lean years, and offer a kind of autonomy Sparta cannot match, creating a soft but powerful web of loyalty to the great king. The cultural stagnation deepens, for without Athens, there is no central stage for the great Pan-Hellenic festivals to flourish as they once did. Olympia still draws competitors, but the absence of Athenian dramatists, philosophers, and statesmen leaves the gatherings diminished, more concerned with displays of military pageantry than with the celebration of the gods or the human spirit. Younger generations grow up knowing only the Spartan model, a Greece where silence is safer than speech, obedience is more valuable than innovation, and glory is measured by service to the state rather than by the creation of something new. This uniformity, intended to preserve order, instead begins to suffocate the vitality of the Hellenic world. For even those who once supported Spartan rule now find themselves longing for the intellectual ferment and cultural diversity that Athens, for all its arrogance, had once provided. Rumors spread of hidden enclaves in distant cities where former Athenians, escaped from slavery or exile, preserve fragments of their city's legacy, plays recited from memory, philosophical debates held in whispered tones, maps and mathematical theorems copied by hand in secret. These fragments cannot yet challenge the Spartan order, but they keep alive a seed of resistance, a belief that the Greek world need not remain locked in this rigid shape forever. Sparta, confident in its military supremacy, underestimates the danger of such seeds, focusing instead on quelling more immediate threats like Persian interference or the occasional defiance of a tribute city. Yet history is rarely undone by the obvious enemies alone. More often, it is the slow accumulation of small discontents, the quiet building of alliances, and the gradual shift in loyalty that erodes even the strongest of empires. As the decade turns, the question no longer is whether someone will rise to challenge Sparta's dominance, but who will take the first bold step, and whether the echoes of Athens, though its stones lie in ruins, might yet shape the battle to come. A decade after the obliteration of Athens, the Greek world has settled into an uneasy rhythm under Spartan supremacy. Yet beneath the surface, the currents of opposition are gathering force, driven as much by economic necessity as by resentment of Laconian rule. For the tribute demands have grown heavier, the trade networks less reliable, and the promises of stability have given way to the reality of a rigid and joyless hegemony. Corinth, once a beneficiary of Athenian decline, now finds its merchant fleets constrained by Spartan naval directives that prioritize military patrols over commercial shipping, and the resulting loss of profit pushes its ruling council toward quiet defiance, seeking new markets and covertly negotiating with cities under Persian influence. Thebes, having rebuilt its hoplite forces under the guise of self-defense, begins to position itself as a potential leader of a counter-Spartan coalition, appealing to the shared frustration of other Peleis and invoking the fear that what happened to Athens could one day happen to them. Even in the Peloponnese, among Sparta's traditional allies, there are murmurings of discontent as the burdens of empire press more heavily upon them than they had ever anticipated. Meanwhile, in the eastern Aegean, the Persian satraps deepen their hold over former Athenian allies, offering them grain shipments in times of shortage, favorable tax arrangements, and the promise, never quite spoken aloud, that Persia would protect them should Sparta's reach grow oppressive. The cultural decay, though less visible than military or economic shifts, continues to gnaw at the soul of Greece, for without Athens, the theaters have fallen silent, the schools of rhetoric are closed, and the art of public persuasion is all but lost. The once bright competition between city-states to excel not only in war, but in beauty, wisdom, and innovation, has dimmed to a monotone contest of military discipline. Those who still remember the vibrancy of the old festivals speak of them in wistful tones to a younger generation that cannot imagine such gatherings. Grand performances under the stars, debates that stirred the mind as much as the heart, or public works meant to inspire rather than intimidate. The Spartans themselves remain unmoved by such losses, for their worldview values endurance, obedience, and the suppression of individual ambition. Yet in their inability to see the worth of what they have destroyed, they fail to notice how their empire's legitimacy erodes in the minds of those they rule. In hidden corners of the Aegean, bands of exiled Athenians and their descendants continue to preserve fragments of their heritage, teaching their children the old stories, reciting the laws of Solon, and passing down from memory the speeches of Pericles that once celebrated the virtues of democracy and civic pride. These scattered remnants, powerless in the open, weave a quiet network of sympathizers, traitors, and disaffected officials, spreading not arms but ideas that speak of a Greece not united by the spear of Sparta or the gold of Persia, but by the freedom of its people to govern themselves. It is in these whispers, more than in any single act of defiance, that the real threat to Spartan power takes shape. For while armies can be defeated and cities razed, the persistence of an ideal, especially one tied to the memory of a martyred city, has a way of enduring beyond the reach of any soldier's blade. As the years pass, the tension tightens, and though the streets of Sparta remain orderly and its phalanxes as formidable as ever, a shadow grows on the horizon, cast not by any one enemy, but by the combined weight of ambition, fear, and the yearning for something more than the narrow life the Spartan order allows. The day will come when these forces meet in open challenge, and when it does, the fate of Greece will again hang in the balance, this time without Athens to lead the charge. Unless, against all expectation, the city's spirit returns in a form its destroyers could never have foreseen. By the time 2 full decades have passed since the flames consumed Athens, the generation that once knew the city as a living, breathing polis is fading, yet the memory of its destruction has transformed into something even more dangerous for Sparta. A legend, a symbol of both warning and inspiration, whispered in marketplaces and taverns from the Peloponnese to the shores of Ionia. To Sparta's rulers, the erasure of Athens had been meant as the ultimate demonstration of strength, a lesson to all who might defy them. But history has twisted the meaning. To the oppressed and the ambitious, Athens has become a martyr of freedom, its loss a rallying point for those who dream of a different Greece. Thebes now moves more boldly, forging secret alliances with Corinth, Argos, and even smaller cities once too fearful to speak against Sparta. their leaders meeting under the cover of night to discuss how best to challenge the hegemony without provoking premature retaliation. Persian influence grows steadily, its satraps acting as both financiers and political brokers, subtly encouraging dissent while offering gold and grain to those willing to break from Spartan control. In the absence of a cultural capital, regional centers begin to emerge with their own ambitions: Syracuse in the west, Rhodes in the southeast, and Thebes itself in central Greece, all experimenting in cautious ways with the preservation or revival of traditions Sparta had stamped out, from competitive festivals to philosophical gatherings. The Spartans, bound by their rigid code, see these changes only dimly, focusing their attention on military readiness and the maintenance of order, but cracks are widening in their empire's foundation. Trade is still hampered by the loss of Athenian fleets and merchants, and the once profitable Aegean routes are plagued by piracy, some of it backed by Persian gold, some of it by rogue allies seeking to undermine Sparta's grip. The Helot population at home grows bolder, testing the limits of Spartan control with small acts of rebellion that demand the recall of troops from distant garrisons, further weakening their presence abroad. In cultural terms, the younger Greeks born after Athens's fall have grown up under Spartan dominance, but without its original mystique. To them, the Spartan way is not a source of awe, but a burden. And when they hear the older generations speak of a time when plays, debates, and festivals animated Greek life, they feel a sense of loss for something they never experienced, but now imagine as a golden age. This longing feeds a quiet restlessness, a desire for change that needs only a spark to become an open flame. Meanwhile, the exiled Athenians and their descendants, scattered across the Mediterranean, maintain their hidden network, their enclaves of memory and identity, their stubborn belief that what was once lost can be reborn. They circulate forbidden copies of Athenian laws, pass down speeches and plays through oral tradition, and train their young not only in the art of war, but in the ideals of citizenship and free thought. These seeds, planted in secret, begin to bear fruit as more and more disaffected Greeks come into contact with them, finding in their words a vision that neither Sparta's discipline nor Persia's wealth can offer. It is in this moment, as discontent swells yet remains unseen by those at the top, that the course of the Greek world approaches another turning point. For the forces now in motion are not driven solely by the politics of the present, but by the memory of what was destroyed and the hunger for what might still be reclaimed. And the question is no longer whether the shadow of Athens will return, but in what form, and at what cost to those who dare to challenge the masters of Greece. 3 decades after the destruction of Athens, the balance of power in Greece is beginning to tilt, though the change is so gradual that Sparta's leaders fail to grasp its full danger until it is almost too late. For while their phalanxes remain disciplined and their reputation as warriors still commands fear, the machinery of their empire is rusting from within. Thebes, having patiently cultivated alliances and strengthened its military, now moves to position itself as the protector of Greek autonomy, framing its cause not as revenge against Sparta, but as a restoration of balance among the poleis, and this framing draws in support from cities weary of decades under Laconian shadow. Corinth, long chafing under restrictions on its trade, begins supplying Thebes quietly with funds and naval resources, disguising the transactions as routine commerce, while Argos offers its own hoplites in exchange for promises of influence in the post-Spartan order. Persia, ever the calculating opportunist, provides just enough aid to the anti-Spartan bloc to keep the conflict simmering without committing so much as to provoke direct war with Sparta, for it sees in Greek division a guarantee that no united threat will ever march eastward. In the cultural sphere, the revival of suppressed traditions has gathered momentum. Festivals in Thebes and Rhodes now feature plays and poetry once thought lost, smuggled fragments of Athenian works reconstructed by exiles and their allies, stirring audiences who had grown up in a Greece stripped of such expressions. The effect is more than artistic, it is political, for each performance reminds those who watch that there was once a time when Greece celebrated the life of the mind as much as the art of war, and that such a time might yet return. The Spartan response is predictably inflexible. Harsher controls on gatherings, stricter enforcement of tribute, and the dispatch of more harmos to suspected centers of dissent, measures that succeed only in deepening resentment and pushing opposition further underground. Meanwhile, the Helot unrest in the Peloponnese intensifies, forcing Sparta to keep more troops at home and limiting its ability to project power abroad, a reality its enemies quietly exploit. The exiled Athenians, though still scattered, begin to coordinate more openly with the Theban-led coalition, offering not only strategic advice, but also the moral weight of their city's martyrdom. They speak of Athens not merely as a place lost, but as an ideal worth dying for. And in this message, they find willing listeners among young men and women who have known only the constricted life of the Spartan order. Slowly, the idea takes root that challenging Sparta is not just a political necessity, but a moral duty, and that the cost of failure, though great, would be no greater than the cost of living forever in submission. It is in this simmering atmosphere of clandestine alliances, cultural awakening, and mounting unrest that the first sparks of open confrontation begin to glow. And though the storm has not yet broken, the air over Greece feels charged with the inevitability of conflict, as if the land itself remembers the voices and visions that were silenced in the smoke over the Acropolis, and waits for the moment when they will return, transformed from memory into action. The year is 374 BCE in this altered history, and the first open blows against Spartan supremacy are struck not in some grand declaration of war, but in the quiet defiance of cities refusing to pay tribute, a refusal that forces Sparta to dispatch punitive expeditions across a restless Greece, stretching its forces thinner than ever before, and revealing to all that the once unassailable giant can be made to stumble. Thebes, now confident in its coalition, moves from secret plotting to open challenge, declaring that it will no longer recognize Spartan authority over Boeotia, and inviting other cities to stand with it, a call that resonates far beyond its borders as news spreads through merchants, envoys, and the growing network of exiled Athenians who see in this defiance the long-awaited chance to strike. Corinth throws its weight more openly behind the movement, supplying ships to patrol the isthmus and block Spartan access to northern Greece. While Argos rallies hoplites to march in support of Theban forces, Persia, content to feed the fire without taking the field, releases funds and grain to the anti-Spartan alliance, ensuring that their armies can march and their cities can endure a siege if needed. The cultural revival intertwines with the political struggle. Plays recounting the fall of Athens are staged as allegories for the present. Poets speak of the second dawn of Greece, and orators channel the memory of Pericles and Solon to inspire citizens to action. For the younger generation, raised in the shadow of Spartan dominance, the call to arms is not only for freedom, but for the chance to live in a Greece where the mind and spirit are honored alongside the sword. Sparta, slow to adapt and bound by the belief that fear alone can preserve its rule, responds with the same methods it has always used: harsh decrees, military intimidation, and targeted assassinations of opposition leaders. Yet these tactics only harden resistance, for every fallen leader becomes a martyr, and every act of repression reinforces the narrative that Sparta's rule is an affront to the very idea of Greek liberty. The Helot unrest in the Peloponnese continues to gnaw at the core of Spartan stability, forcing the retention of critical forces at home and making any prolonged campaign abroad a dangerous gamble. Meanwhile, whispers spread that some among the Spartan allies are quietly negotiating with Thebes, calculating that switching sides before a decisive battle could secure them favorable terms in the new order. Across the Aegean, the descendants of Athens's survivors begin to converge on Thebes, not in great numbers, but in symbolic presence, bringing with them fragments of their city's heritage, inscriptions, relics, and the preserved words of their philosophers and dramatists, which are displayed in public as proof that the spirit of Athens still lives. These gatherings, part political rally and part cultural resurrection, electrify the anti-Spartan cause, giving the movement a unifying symbol that transcends regional rivalries. As the summer campaigning season approaches, armies begin to muster, and the roads of Greece fill with soldiers, packed trains, and the clamor of weapons being prepared for war. The stage is set for a confrontation that will decide whether Sparta's dominance will endure another generation or be shattered in the very way it once shattered Athens, and in every campfireside conversation, from the seasoned hoplite to the fresh-faced recruit, there is a sense that what is coming is not merely a war for territory, but a reckoning for the soul of Greece itself. The summer of 371 BCE arrives like a drawn bowstring, the tension palpable across the Hellenic world, and when the string is finally released, it is at Leuctra, a small Boeotian plain that in our reality would mark the turning of Greek history, but in this altered world carries a weight far greater, for here the Theban-led coalition meets the full force of Sparta's armies in a clash that will determine the fate of 3 decades of Laconian dominance. The Spartans, though fewer in number than in the days of their prime, still march with the disciplined precision that has made their phalanx the terror of Greece, but they face an enemy that has studied them, prepared for them, and above all believes that defeating them is not just possible, but necessary. The Thebans under Epaminondas have restructured their tactics, massing their best troops on the left wing in an unorthodox, deep formation designed to punch through the Spartan right, where their king and elite warriors stand. Corinthian and Argive contingents fill the lines, and scattered among them are the exiled Athenians, carrying shields painted with the owl of their lost city, fighting not for a homeland to which they can return, but for the chance to shape a new one. As the armies close, the air fills with the thunder of bronze and the low roar of thousands of voices, and when the shields meet, the sound is like the cracking of the earth itself. The Theban tactic works with brutal efficiency. The concentrated force smashes into the Spartan elite, driving them back step by step, and as their formation bends, the momentum of the battle shifts. Spartan discipline holds longer than any other force could manage, but the years of overextension, the absence of fresh reserves, and the simmering unrest at home weigh on them. When their king falls in the crush, struck down amid the chaos, the morale of the Spartan line falters, and the Theban advance becomes an unstoppable push. By the day's end, the field is strewn with the bodies of warriors who had once seemed invincible, and the legend of Spartan supremacy is broken as surely as their phalanx. Word of the defeat spreads across Greece with the speed of rumor and the force of revelation. Cities that had been bound to Sparta by fear now see an opening and begin to slip from its grasp, withholding tribute, expelling garrisons, or openly declaring for the Theban alliance. Even in the Peloponnese, long the heart of Spartan strength, there are murmurs of rebellion as allies weigh the cost of loyalty to a power that can no longer guarantee victory. Thebes, flush with triumph, calls for a congress of the free cities to establish a new order, framing itself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, though its leaders are well aware that power once seized is rarely surrendered willingly. The exiled Athenians, bloodied but unbroken, see in the victory a vindication of all they have preserved and whispered in the shadows for decades. And while none pretend that Athens can be rebuilt from ash, they speak now of founding a new city, a place that will inherit the spirit, if not the stones, of the one lost to Spartan fire. For Sparta, the road ahead is steep and uncertain. The defeat at Leuctra is not merely a military loss, but the shattering of an aura that had shielded them from challenge, and in a world that has lived too long under their spear, the appetite for change is ravenous. Greece stands on the edge of a transformation as profound as the one that followed the destruction of Athens, and no one can yet say whether the coming years will bring unity, chaos, or the birth of something entirely new. The aftermath of Leuctra ripples across Greece like a tremor that refuses to fade, shaking loose the bonds that have held the Spartan hegemony together for 3 decades and leaving the once mighty city to face a reality it has never known: weakness in the eyes of its peers. In the weeks following the battle, news of the Spartan defeat emboldened city after city to renounce their obligations, driving out Harmos, withholding tribute, and in some cases, joining the Theban coalition outright. In the Peloponnese, the Arcadians form a league of their own, determined to prevent Sparta from ever regaining its dominance, while Messenia, long enslaved under Spartan rule, rises in open revolt, its people reclaiming their lands and declaring independence in a moment that strikes at the very heart of the Spartan system, for without the labor of the Helots, the economic foundation of Sparta begins to crumble. The Thebans, flush with their victory, move quickly to consolidate their influence, calling assemblies to establish a new order that they present as a league of equals, but which in practice places Thebes at the center, a position it has long coveted. Corinth and Argos push for trade reforms to restore the commercial networks disrupted since Athens' destruction, while in the east, Persian envoys quietly attend these gatherings, offering gold and grain to ensure that their voice will be heard in whatever shape this new Greece takes. Amid these political shifts, the exiled Athenians seize their moment, proposing the creation of a new polis on the coast of Euboea, a city that would not claim the name Athens, but would inherit its ideals, governed by laws modeled on the old democracy, open to citizens from across Greece who share the vision of a free and participatory society. The proposal draws fierce debate, for while many see the symbolic value of such a foundation, others fear it will simply recreate the rivalries that once divided Greece. Yet the idea captures imaginations in a way few political proposals have in decades, offering not just an alliance of necessity, but a common aspiration. For Sparta, the decline is rapid and merciless. Its armies, though still formidable in discipline, are too few to fight on multiple fronts, and the loss of Messenian territory forces many warriors to remain at home to guard against further uprisings. Diplomatically isolated, the Spartans attempt to play their enemies against one another, but the coalition that has risen against them is bound not by affection, but by shared memory of their heavy-handed rule and the fresh scent of opportunity. Culturally, the tide continues to turn as festivals once suppressed by Sparta return in full force, with plays, debates, and competitions that celebrate the ideals of civic freedom. And in these gatherings, the story of Athens, its glory, its arrogance, its destruction, becomes a touchstone, both cautionary and inspirational. Merchants speak of a revival in trade, poets of a rebirth of the Greek spirit, and soldiers of a future where no single city holds the rest in fear. Yet beneath the optimism lies a dangerous truth. The power that once belonged to Sparta is not gone, only transferred, and those who now lead must choose whether to guard the fragile balance or to repeat the same mistakes under a different banner. The fate of Greece once turned on the fall of Athens, and now it turns again in the wake of Sparta's shattering, the road ahead branching toward unity, chaos, or perhaps an era of fleeting brilliance before the next great power rises from beyond the horizon. The years following Sparta's collapse into political irrelevance reveal that victory over a tyrant does not automatically bring harmony, for the coalition that once stood united against Laconian dominance now begins to strain under the weight of competing ambitions, and the fragile balance of power threatens to fracture once more. Thebes, flush with its role as liberator, assumes a position of leadership that is not universally welcomed, using its military strength to enforce decisions in the so-called League of Equals, and provoking murmurs that it has simply replaced Sparta at the top of the hierarchy. Corinth, eager to restore its commercial supremacy, pushes for policies that favor its merchants, creating tensions with inland allies who see little benefit from trade reforms. The newly founded Euboean city, intended as the symbolic heir to Athens's ideals, becomes a magnet for thinkers, artists, and political exiles. Its assembly, a place where rhetoric and philosophy once again shape governance, but its very success draws suspicion from Thebes, which fears the rise of a cultural rival that could unite Greece in ways its military might cannot. Persian influence, subtle yet persistent, continues to seep into Greek affairs, offering loans and grain to struggling cities in exchange for political favors. And some whisper that the great king sees in this fractured Greece an opportunity to control it more effectively than any army could. Amid this complex web of alliances and rivalries, the descendants of Athens's survivors find themselves at a crossroads. Some advocate for the new city to remain purely a beacon of culture and diplomacy, avoiding entanglement in power struggles, while others argue that without political and military strength, it will inevitably fall prey to the same fate as its predecessor. The memory of Athens's destruction, though still a potent symbol, begins to shift in meaning. For some, it remains a rallying cry for freedom, while for others, it becomes a warning about the dangers of hubris and overreach. Festivals across Greece now feature plays and poems that reinterpret the fall of Athens in light of current events, drawing parallels between the arrogance that led to its end and the growing assertiveness of Thebes. The Helot population in Messenia, now free, works to rebuild its society and strengthen its defenses, aware that old masters may one day seek to reclaim what they lost, while in Sparta itself a somber reality takes hold. The city that once commanded the respect and fear of the entire Greek world now clings to survival, its power reduced to local influence, its name spoken more in historical reflection than in present threat. Yet even in this altered landscape, the undercurrent of competition that has always defined the Greek world persists, and as new alliances form and old grudges resurface, there is a growing sense that the peace bought at Leuctra is a fragile one, a pause in the eternal cycle of rivalry and ambition. The question that lingers over every council meeting, every diplomatic exchange, and every festival is whether Greece will learn from the lessons written in fire and blood when Athens was erased, or whether it is destined to repeat them under new banners, each power convinced that it alone can shape the destiny of the Hellenes without falling victim to the same fate. A generation after the decisive blow at Leuctra and the foundation of the new Euboean city, Greece stands transformed yet still haunted by the shadow of the choice Sparta made when it burned Athens to the ground. For while the political map bears little resemblance to the world that existed before the Peloponnesian War, the consequences of that annihilation ripple through every aspect of Hellenic life. Thebes has reached the zenith of its influence, but the very methods it uses to hold the league together, military pressure, political coercion, and the installation of friendly regimes, begin to mirror the Spartan practices it once condemned, eroding the moral authority it claimed as liberator. Corinth enjoys a revival of its merchant wealth, but finds itself constantly mediating disputes between allies, aware that any imbalance could fracture the fragile coalitions that keep larger powers in check. The Euboean city, a living experiment in resurrecting Athenian ideals, thrives culturally, attracting philosophers, dramatists, and inventors from across the Greek world. Its assembly, once again, a place where laws are debated openly and decisions shaped by the collective voice of citizens. Yet its very vibrancy draws both admiration and fear, for it represents a vision of Greece that could, if ever combined with military strength, dominate the entire Aegean, not through conquest, but through attraction. Persian influence persists like a tide, never fully receding, shaping Greek politics through loans, trade agreements, and the quiet placement of sympathetic leaders in strategic cities, ensuring that no single Greek power can unify the polis in a way that might threaten the empire to the east. In the Peloponnese, Sparta survives as a diminished force, its people hardened by loss, but bound to a way of life that refuses to adapt. Their fields worked now by their own citizens rather than helots, their warriors fewer in number, their ambitions confined to defending their remaining territory. The cultural revival across Greece is undeniable. Festivals echo once again with theater and song, philosophers debate in public squares, and artisans compete to outdo one another in temples and monuments. But beneath the surface, there remains the ever-present tension between independence and unity, ambition and stability. The lesson of Athens's destruction is interpreted differently in every city. Some see it as a warning never to allow one power to grow so dominant that others must unite to destroy it, while others take from it the belief that decisive and total victory is the surest way to secure one's place in history. The descendants of those who once walked the streets of Athens now speak of their ancestral city not as a place to be rebuilt, but as a legacy to be honored, ensuring that the ideas born there, however imperfectly, continue to shape the destiny of the Hellenes. And yet, even as Greece thrives in pockets and falters in others, the larger world presses in, with rumors of a rising power to the north, under the young and ambitious Macedonian kings, a force that may in time sweep aside the delicate balance the Greeks have fought so long to preserve. In this alternate history, the road from the flames of Athens to the fragile peace of the present has been marked by war, betrayal, and rebirth. But the story is far from over, for the choices of the next generation will determine whether the sacrifice of a city was the seed of a lasting freedom or merely the prelude to another cycle of domination. So, in this world where Sparta chose to erase Athens entirely, Greek history unfolded along a path both alien and familiar. Without the enduring cultural engine of classical Athens, philosophy was stunted, democracy nearly lost. And yet the idea of freedom persisted, carried like an ember by those who refused to let it die. New powers rose, coalitions formed and fractured, and the dream of a Greece united in both strength and spirit remained just that, a dream. If you were born into this world, would you see the destruction of Athens as a necessary act to secure stability, or as a tragedy